Real quick, I want to talk about the sponsor of today's episode. They've been the sponsor for a lot of episodes. This is Breakmark Ultimate. They are a jersey apparel company. They were the ones that helped out my team, San Antonio Alamode, the club team I played for this past season, with some jerseys, some awesome designs. So if you're a high school team, college team, club team, or just any sort of team looking for some jerseys, I think Breakmark Ultimate is a great option. They're also the ones helping me out with this Tobu Fitness merch. It's the stuff that you see me wearing in pretty much all my videos now. So if you're interested in getting some jerseys, or if you're interested in helping out your boy and getting some Tobu Fitness merch, make sure you check out the links down in the show notes, or you can check out the link in my bio on Instagram if you're looking for some more information. Let's get back to the show. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Tobu Fitness Podcast. This is episode number 24. I got a very special guest today, somebody that I've been working with for a while, been talking to for a while, but really nice to kind of get him on the podcast and talk, because he's on a little bit of a media tour recently, just with the Tokay Super Team. Just did a video with Hive, really kind of getting out there. It's Nicholas Whitlock. Nick, thanks for being here.
No worries, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
So do you want to start off by just telling people a little bit about yourself and your background for those that don't know?
Yeah, no worries. So I'm a ultimate player, clearly, from New Zealand. I've been playing since 2013, and I'm 25 now. So that's about 12, 13 years. I've had my fair share of experience at different international lift-off events, and more recently, with teams from Australia or the Tokay Super Team, getting that experience playing with some more international faces. And on the back of that, my name's gone out there a bit more, which has been pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess we can just kind of jump right into it. It's what we were talking about right before we hit record, but Tokay Super Team, you play with them a couple weeks ago, I guess, at the London Invite. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. It was a really cool opportunity. Steph Rapazzo put it together and kind of got in touch with a bunch of top players from around the globe. Some from the States, some from Colombia, a lot from Europe, and they meet. So I flew the furthest by a long way to make my way to London. I think the stat that I was telling everyone was I was on the ground in England for a shorter period of time than I was in the air, which is always funny. And it's definitely catching up with me now. Not with me. That was not a bit. But yeah, the event itself was really cool. I landed in London, and an hour later, I was playing a scrim against Canada, which we ended up winning. It was a really cool opportunity to get a lot of reps and just touches and figure out how each other liked to play. The other highlight of the weekend was, although we were knocked out in a 3-way tie based on points difference, we did end up beating the US World Games team, which I think for anyone is a badge of honor, let alone a team that's just picked up a few days before. So it was a pretty cool experience, a wild ride, and getting to match up and say you could come back on, come to New Zealand and say, like, I matched up on those players. If you can match up on me, you're also ready to go to the world stage. And coming from a small country background, it's pretty cool to be that person that can bridge that gap, make that relative connection to international players, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. How long's that flight, out of curiosity?
It was 13 hours from England to the US, and then another 11 from the US home.
Wow. Yeah, that's brutal. That's really brutal.
Plus crossovers, plus like transit time and everything.
And then completely switching like time zones, so your sleep schedule's all messed up and everything like that.
Yeah, 12-hour difference.
Yeah, that is tough.
It was awesome.
Yeah, like I just told you, I watched the game you guys had against Team USA, and you were, I would venture to say, I don't even think it's going out on a limb. I would say that you, from my perspective, looked like you were the most impactful player on the Tokay Super Team, for that game. And then you had some pretty tough matchups. Like, it seemed like when you were on the field, the deep threat was not available. Like, you had Holzmeyer, you had Ink. The times where you weren't on the field looked like
that's when Team USA was able to get some deep shots and some pretty easy deep scores. I remember, I think it's when it was 9-8 you guys, and to make it 9-9, like it was almost immediately like a deep shot for Team USA, and you weren't on that point. So not only like were you taking tough matchups, but then you were also like contributing a lot offensively. Like what was, yeah, like that game specifically, like what did you kind of have in mind? What were you thinking? What was going through your head?
Yeah, so before going into the game, we kind of had a game plan to just throw everything at them. My assigned matchups prior to the game were Henry and Michael Ing, and Brett Holzmeyer. And come the second half, I ended up matching up on Marquez Brownlee decent amount as well. I think it was just it was a really cool opportunity because I knew flying all the way from New Zealand, that was the game I'd gone there to play. Um, if I didn't play well in that game, or if I didn't get something out of that game, the trip would not be as valuable to me as it was otherwise. How to get in that experience, forcing my mental state into this game really matters, even though at the end of the day, we needed to win by 4 for it to actually matter. But like getting in that mental state and practicing, having those high stress situations against the best players in the world is something I really wanted to get out of deciding to fly all the way to London for this. But yeah, the game itself was pretty cool. Got to match up against a bunch of the top players. I think there was a second or third point into the game. Me and Ing had a really cool matchup where we went back and forth 3 or 4 times, a couple of calls, a couple of big blocks, and it was a really exciting point. And then later in the game, personally, I found Marquez to be the most difficult player to mark, given that he was a handler for the US last weekend. But that didn't mean I could not worry about him going deep. So they just gave him a little bit more of a lever to do what he wanted with the disc. And kind of figuring that out. Because in New Zealand, that kind of player is harder to come by. So that was a pretty cool experience. And then I think the other thing that really stood out for me playing against the US was, and on the flip side, playing for the Tokay Super Team, was how well we as the Super Team were able to utilize our athletic mismatch is probably not the right word for this game in particular, but I don't know what else to call it. Our mismatches on the field, and work through the players who were in the best positions to do the right thing. I felt like we were pretty good at holding space and letting the right people do their thing when it was required. I have a very strong memory. I know it was only last weekend, but I have a strong memory of there being one point where I was just standing still for about 40 seconds with Brett staring at me, and I was just watching. I think it was Ben Dameron and Manu just walking it up the field, just chilling, and like, because they were worried about our downfield threat for the most of the game, we could just like let that happen. And being on a team with such depth was a great privilege. It was really cool to be able to be an impact when required, but also just be confident that I could sit back and watch and enjoy the show.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Who's your favorite person to play with from the Super?
Oh, I've been asked this so many times since I already got back home. This is such a difficult question. I was rooming with Ben Darren, so we built a connection both on and off the field, which was pretty fun. I really enjoyed how Jakob Tam played. Angela Zhu, although she was injured, was such a great person to have around. And I wish we could have played more on the field together. Manu was just someone I'd been looking forward to play with since I first witnessed her play at 2016 Worlds in Poland. We were both there, and she was tearing it up even back then. So getting to play alongside her was a dream come true. I was fanboying a little bit, but that's okay. Who else? Everyone, really. literally everyone. A bunch of the Grut ladies were their synergy on the field kind of comfortably extended to the rest of their team, even though they had played together a bunch. They were able to bring in and give going the flow that was generated because they had that synergy already was a great asset to us. But yeah, all in all, it was a really cool experience. And I think the most special part about it was I played on a couple of all-star teams to a degree. None of this caliber before, but never before has it been such a welcoming and environment with such a lack of egos. Like, although everyone here in their own right is the star, we were really able to kind of put that aside, and everyone was like a really good team player. And then off the field, people got along really, really well. So it was a really cool experience. And yeah, those connections, I think, people will reconnect wherever we are on the globe. So it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Ultimate's such a tight-knit community, even in the inner, like, across the entire world. Like, I feel like it's pretty close-knit. So that's pretty cool there. I want to make a little bit of a shift here. I like to kind of throw this in towards the beginning of podcasts recently, because I feel like it kind of gets a good conversation going. But what's your biggest hot take in Ultimate?
Oh, my biggest hot take. Oh, I know what comes to mind, but this is going to get me in trouble. No, I'll say it. My biggest hot take in Ultimate is that travel should be called more.
Interesting. Okay, tell me more.
My perspective on this is, yes, there's a lot of times where it doesn't matter, and someone drags their toe a couple of centimeters. But I think, especially when breaking a mark or throwing a huck, the margins of error at high level Ultimate are so small. And if you're more comfortable because you're traveling, that could change that margin of error by 5%, which could be enough to change the outcome of the throw. So I think if you're allowing yourself an easier throw by bending the rules to your will, I think that should be called. If the travel happens because you've been bumped or it's not habitual, and it's like open side to an under and the mark's never getting there anyway, I'm less inclined to say it matters. But even if even if it's open side, if you've been like sliding your pivot foot, the marks moved more, right? And now they're more fatigued. So like all these small things add up. And I think if we're all playing to the same rules, it should be called. If the rules get adjusted, I'm okay with it. But until the rules are different, we shouldn't be playing to varying sets of rules. And I know early on in my career, my coach was very adamant that like practice not traveling early on. You'll get called and it'll slow down your momentum and your flow later in your career, yada, yada, yada. So when I see people traveling and getting advantage out of this thing that I've worked really hard on, it's kind of frustrating. And that's not to say I don't travel. Like everyone travels a little bit sometimes, but it's definitely something I don't say, oh, I travel, but I don't care. Yeah. So that's probably my hot take. I hope I've justified it a little bit.
I can see the vision. So I think there was a new rule recently. Maybe this is just US Ultimate, but like the 2-inch rule, you're allowed to drag your foot a little bit.
Yeah,
Okay. Are you a fan of that, or?
I think so. That's not in with diff at the moment. I do think it just shifts the goalposts. But I think it's better than having the number be 0 effectively, and then people being like, oh, it was so small, so it's fine. It does point to like a little shift out of just like, it happens is okay. Yeah, the ones that really annoy me are when people travel on their fakes and they don't actually release the throw. Because as a marker, a lot of the time you're setting yourself off those like 5 to 10 centimeters, those 2 to 4 inch like variance are what matters. And if someone's like traveling on their fake, it throws you off for how far you can get on the actual throw. That one really annoys me.
I see. So then as the mark, you have to correct it farther to the fake and then go farther back.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense. Okay. So how do you feel about like Instagram comment sections then? Like, do we need to be calling more travels?
I think on Instagram it's kind of not really useful. I think it's more of a culture thing. I think the painful part when I see it on Instagram is when someone does call it out, or they say something that's maybe a little bit like facetious, but it's trying to be constructive. And then either the original poster or everyone else goes, "Oh, stop calling travels. It doesn't matter." And that's the part that annoys me. Like, we probably shouldn't be calling it out on Instagram. It's not beneficial, but it's that attitude of players saying they don't matter that annoys me. Because I think I'm not like a huge basketball fan, but I know a while ago, like the travel rules in basketball got really tightened up, and like the NBA refs would start calling them more and everything. And it didn't break the game at all. People just like raised their skill ceiling that was now something that people had to work around. And I think Ultimate is such an offensively minded game anyway, that I think we should be sticking closer to what the leader of the rules say, especially when it puts a little bit of a hindrance on the offense to balance out the sides.
I could see that. Yeah. And then I think to your point, kind of like you said, then if people have to follow the travel rule a little bit more, then they just have to become more skilled. So we challenge players to this isn't become more skills. Yeah. That makes sense for sure. Cool. I like that. I'm interested to hear if people listening to this on YouTube want to comment travel, or if they want to, chime in the comment section. I'd be interested in that.
Good luck.
Well, I would say maybe at the moment, at least, I know a lot of my listeners might be like European or probably predominantly in the US, but we might not know too much about, Ultimate in New Zealand. You want to talk a little bit about that and the state of New Zealand Ultimate, or are there things that people might not understand about it?
It'd be a pleasure. No, New Zealand Ultimate's kind of going well at the moment. We've got thriving mixed division, and then we play split seasons in New Zealand. So most athletes play both mixed and then single gender. Our mixed division goes from around now, so June, July until November, and then the open and women's season starts up, and that goes from the end of the mixed season through till nationals at the end of March, but pushes out to the end of April usually for some teams because there's different events in Australia often. So yeah, that's how our season's structured. So if you want to come across and not have an off season, come across to New Zealand, play the mixed, then play opens, and then play all your international tournaments. It's pretty brutal, but if you're a fiend for ultimate, come across, it'll be great. Yeah, recently we've started getting a lot more teams have standalone coaches, and the interest in coaching's going up, which is really, really cool. A bunch of teams are still player led, but I think the amount of people who see the value in coaching is increasing, especially at the top level. Just so often, for so long, people would be like, "Oh, this person's not as good a player as me. That means they shouldn't coach me." But I think people are starting to realize that the skill set of coaching is very rarely how fast you can run. Um, so yeah, putting the value on coaching's been a big shift recently. And then our skill scene has gone through ups and downs, but I think it's starting to see a resurgence again now, which hopefully in the years to come, we'll see a bunch more volume coming through from our school players. The players we do see coming through high school are always like really, really good, and they make their way into the club environment either as training players or onto the rosters relatively quickly out of high school. But hopefully we start getting more volume to bridge that gap between jumping straight from high school or uni, the top club teams. Because at the moment, that's the one thing that New Zealand's lacking is volume of players. Most cities have at least a couple, but those teams that bridge the gap between social and attempting to compete don't really exist. So a place for those is something I'm hoping opens up in the future.
For sure. It almost sounds like, I know in some US cities, especially the ones that have been like blue bloods or, powerhouses for a while. Like I can think North Carolina, like rank system, Seattle, like have that pipeline of the youth ultimates normalized, and then you get the best talent kind of coming up. And like I mean, the thing about coaching too, like I feel like I can really vouch for that, where I'm not a good player by any means, but I'm very confident in my skill set of coaching players that are a lot better than me. And yeah, coaching and playing is very, very different. Um,
Yeah.
how do you feel like the style of play in New Zealand? Like, is there kind of like one specific type of play? And how have you seen maybe like a US system somewhere that's replicated it a little bit?
I think that's hard to say. Um, I think traditionally people would say we're kind of a combination of like the Japanese style and Australian style, which are two opposite styles. Um, Traditionally, that being Australia, big ball, kind of look to generate space by threatening the deep and then playing through what that gives you. And Japan being the opposite, looking to play through the small space. And if people put effort into stopping that, they'll open up the big space. So we kind of take a little bit of both traditionally. More recently, I think myself and a few other people who coach and have kind of sway in their communities have taken more conscious looks at different teams and places around the globe to get inspiration from, to how we play and things like that. But you're definitely starting to see, even within cities in New Zealand, people diverge from that homogenous, this is how New Zealand plays, like the different cities play in different ways now. I think what's caused that is the cities themselves have more elite depth. So it's no longer the national squad, whoever makes the top 20 players for each gender in the country, kind of dictating what the style of the country is playing. Now it's down to the clubs, and then that then feeds into the national squads, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so that's my roundabout way of saying we kind of don't have one unique style, but it would be pretty close to what Australia's doing now as well. They're starting to get really, really good at moving the ball very quickly, but they still have those big shots to fall back on, and people know that going into the game, and have to do something to account for that. And we definitely have a similar style. I think purely based on out of anyone, we don't get much international experience as units, but Australia's the one we do get the most with. So, yeah.
Sure. Uh, what do you feel like shapes your own personal philosophy, whether it's like when you're coaching or playing? I know you did the video with Hive recently about dribbling, and I mean I've done some stuff with Hive, had Felix on the podcast, so good relationship with that. Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about kind of your own personal beliefs?
Yeah, so I think touching on the everyone can coach to a degree thing that I said before, I really truly believe that no matter who I'm playing with or coaching, I can learn a little bit from whoever. And people say, oh, but that person's been playing a week. What can you learn from them? I think that and this kind of feeds into my philosophy. I think the intuitions that brand new players have are often, although they might be slightly unique or different, are often have some source of truth in them. They'll be like, you'll think, why did they take that option? And it'll be something that didn't work, but they had an intuition there, right? And a lot of the time we can learn from that. So going forward into like my coaching philosophy, I'm like a huge advocate for people learning through experimentation and mistakes, even at the highest level. So there's obviously a time in a season where you have to go, hey, we're in tournament mode now. We're not okay with you taking that 80% option to try expand your wheelhouse or whatever. But at least for the first month or so of a season, I really want all my players not only to be pushing themselves to make mistakes in individual skills, but the trading sessions I'll set up will be really based around kind of playing a lot of games. They might have different constraints or whatever. I think I wrote a blog recently about why I love mini so much. And kind of the different ways you can set up the rule set in mini to encourage people to have these realizations that you want to encourage. So if I'm in a training session, oftentimes I'll run a couple of drills and tell people the rules. And people won't explicitly be told what we're trying to learn until halfway into the training session. Because I want people to kind of come to the realization of the best way to do this themselves. And I go, yes, that's true. Great idea. We'll do that. But obviously it's guided and shaped. But whenever a team comes to a consensus themselves in sport or life, they got to be more enthusiastic and learn better. And then on the other hand, this is a more simple one, but I've done a little bit of reading, especially in like youth and teen coaching, but it applies to adults as well. You're starting to see pro teams do this a lot. They'll play tag at a warm up, or they'll do something a bit silly or fun. And I think the most important thing for me as a coach is if the players don't have fun, I'm not doing my job. Like that's the priority, because if they're not having fun, they're not learning as well. So if I can create a fun training that also does all the learning and the repping and the fitness that I want the team to get out, but if they have fun as a priority, all of that is going to be way more impactful. Clearly as a coach, there's once or twice a season where you're going to go, I can't get my point across in a happy-go-lucky that everyone's going to be laughing the whole time kind of way. But instead of that being the default, we just got to work harder, got to rep this more. It's kind of reserved for moments where it will be its most impactful. And that's something I really try to do. And I've had really good success with it over the last few years with the teams I've been coaching. So yeah, that's probably what I'd say my coaching philosophy is. Fun is the priority, and then let people experiment and learn from constraint-driven games. Definitely stolen that from a few places. I think in the ultimate community, in French, does a lot of constraint-driven games, and a lot of ideas from him.
Yeah. I love that. I think he has a book, if I'm not mistaken, about like a bunch of different games, constraint games, and that's awesome. Yeah. I wrote down a lot of notes. I think that was really good. I agree with all of that. I mean, that stuff, I've been definitely trying to push some of that. And so I love hearing you say that. I want to unpack a little bit of what you said. Starting with like the intuition that you notice brand new players have. I mean, I'll relate this to myself. Again, like I'm not a perfect example when it comes to playing or anything like that, but I know like coming from a background of playing basketball and then playing Ultimate, like it felt so similar, but it felt like Ultimate was just basketball with more space, and I had a little bit more time. So like it almost kind of felt a little bit easier at first. And I know not to keep bringing up Felix in Hive, but his whole thing is Hex. And I know, I mean, Hex isn't everything, right? But his big kind of thing that he's known for is Hex. And I remember having conversations with him where he's talked about he first teaches players how to play Hex, and then when they go play for a different team and they have to learn vert stack or horizontal stack, it feels so foreign to them because it's their like initial, maybe that's not their intuition, so to speak, because that is a system they learned, but like the kind of the vanilla like standard system that everybody's supposed to know, vert and stack, like feels weird to them, even though that's what everybody's quote unquote supposed to do. I find really interesting.
Yeah, I could talk to that. I think even taking a step further, and this might be what Felix is getting at when he talks about teaching people Hex, because from what I know of his philosophy, it is a little bit kind of tilted in this direction. Is that if I got like 18 new players who had never played before, I wouldn't teach them anything for 2-3 weeks. I just set up games that like make them experiment and force them to do different things. And I think especially if they're all brand new, like you can build that together. And if you have someone guiding them, you can kind of get to that point where people have this basic understanding of what each other do as a priority, and then have the system on top. And you're seeing this in top teams now. Like people have a structure, but after the first pass or after the defense is set, like that structure doesn't really matter until the disc is static again. People are just fluid and playing, and there might be a little bit of guidance around what you should do if it's not like an obvious option on how to create that space. But all the top teams now are just motion and flow is the priority, and then everything else comes after. But I still think, and I'm not sure if this is the case internationally, but I'm willing to guess it is. But when you get new players, and you might have about half the team's experience, but then you're coming in at the start of a year, or you're taking like a open session, and you've got a bunch of beginners. So often I see people pulling out, we got to play vert stack, and then this new player goes out. They kind of know the gist because I've been given the 30-second debrief, and then they'll run and get the disc, or they run and they won't get the disc, and then people go, oh, you're clogging space there, don't go there. But if you look at why they did that, they go, my defender was behind me. If I ran here and I expected the person to be able to throw to me. And that intuition that's all good things, right? So if we can encourage those decisions to keep growing alongside the understanding of whatever structures we want to coach, I think is the most important thing. So often, and this is not the case so much anymore, but in general, we went through a period where we would get like these crazy athletes come into our sport, and their initial intuition was really good, but we wanted them to be able to slot into top teams, into structures that people were playing because they were super athletic. So we really prescribe what to do. And they would get really, really good at doing that quite quickly, but then they would plateau because they hadn't been building that intuitive understanding of the game, because it had been like dissuaded from their development. And that's like a really sad thing for me, because these people like had such energy for the game at the start. And then a lot of the time, the individuals who are the most athletic coming to our sport are the ones who are already the most sports-minded, inclined coming into it. So then to distill our game down to cut away from the disc and then towards the disc and then do the opposite, it kind of makes the game boring to these players who are going to be some of our most athletic people. And from that perspective, it kind of goes back to if they're having fun, that's going to be better for everyone kind of thing. Yeah, so that's kind of what I mean by the intuition kind of thing. And then as a coach, the learning from that kind of thing is everyone's going to make the different mistakes. But if someone makes a mistake in a new way, you should pay attention to that and see why, where that thought process was from.
Yeah, I think you articulated that super well. Like I hear that a lot. I think I probably hear it more from like a throwing perspective, I would say. Like this was objectively the right throw. This was objectively the wrong throw. And yeah, to your point, like there's no objective right or wrong. It's
Yeah.
Like if you completed the task, like if your task was to try to get to open space, if your task was to advance the disc, if your task was to score, right? That's usually, I'm going on a limb here and say that the task is usually to score the disc. Like if you can do that, it doesn't really matter, but within reason, of course, it doesn't really matter what the throw was. Like if you completed it, then I wouldn't say there's really an objective right or wrong. I can't remember if I've ever said this publicly, but I think my theory is I think a lot of Ultimate players are also come from like a STEM background where there is a lot of like right and wrong, right? Everything's binary. There is or isn't. Whereas like I know in my field, like even though exercise science is technically STEM, like we find that there's not like there is a correct right or wrong way to prevent injuries. There is a correct right or wrong way to get better, because what might work for you, right, might not work for somebody else. It's like it's kind of abstract, right? To your point, like you can experiment if you can figure out, like if you're given that kind of freedom to make the mistakes and like intuitively figure those things out, like I feel like that leads to a lot more like long-term development as well.
Yeah. No, I think the throwing point is very apt, given that so many people get told, "Oh, just look for the hammer straight away." And sometimes, if you're trying to win a game, that's the short-term solution, right? And that's understandable, and I can get that. But if you have the opportunity to train that, and as soon as someone's proven, and I think we should give people more trust in this direction. If people are able to like change their mindset from a training to a game scenario, especially newer players, if you go, hey, this is a game, I want you to just take the 100% safe option. That's probably going to be a reset to the handler. As soon as stuff proves they can do that, you don't need to just tell them that every time at training anymore. Like they should be able to make that mistake, because someone who's only been playing 2 or 3 months, a mistake from them is so much more valuable than a mistake from someone who's been playing 8 years. because they wouldn't have seen that mistake before, right? So if they make it themselves, they're going to get the most, like, the maximum learning from that, from a utilitarian perspective, right? So for your team, them making a mistake improves the team by more than any other mistake that you could make. And then from the throwing perspective, I think throws are largely underappreciated in our sport, although the best players that come to people's minds are always the best throwers. So when we're talking about, like, what is the most important aspect of the game, oftentimes from, like, a coaching perspective, from an individual perspective, people go, oh, throwing is obviously important. But I don't think people say, oh, once you get to this level of throwing doesn't really matter anymore. But personally, I think throwing is the most important and has the largest skill ceiling, to put it that way, in Ultimate, is throwing. And if you look at all these top throwers, like, they can open their game up no matter where they have the disc on the field, right? And that's not because they've trained their backhands and forehands really, really well. That doesn't mean to say they have bad backhands and forehands. Oftentimes they have the best backhand and forehands, but they're really good at that because people know that they have all these other tools in their tool belt, that they can't 100% focus on someone's backhand. Like, if I'm marking someone and I know the only two options that they could throw are a flat forehand or a flat backhand to a reset or an under, I'm probably gonna get a hand block on them sometime during the game. But if someone's able to throw something bladey, something upside down, something offhand, they're probably gonna have great success. Not only, they might never throw those options, but if they threaten to throw them, that's a lot of the time all you need. More recently, I've started making a conscious effort to do, if I see something that I go, that's fun, or that's a weird throw. And then I just, like, when you're tossing with a mate, you start messing around. And I'm sure most people have said this, if not heard this. And that's that someone does this throw and you think or say, but that's never going to be useful in a game. Why would you practice that? And that's possibly true for a lot of throws. But in the off chance that you're in a scenario where that throw is the one that could make the difference, why not hang practiced it? Just a little bit, right? You could be in a scenario where 50% offhand thumber is the best option you have on stall 8, right? And I'd rather have practiced that 4 times than forced to 0% forehand. And that's obviously a really, like, convoluted example, but pushing those extremes kind of explains where I'm coming from. I think I wrote a little bit about this here and there, but started last year, I started practicing my offhand scubers. And I think in the last 12 months, people have been kind of more open to this throw in particular. But at the time where I started working on it, it was something that just, like, hadn't been seen. So I started working on this, and lots of people were like, oh, that's never going to be useful. Why would you work on that? I was like, first of all, it's fun. Like, whether I ever use it or not, like, if this keeps me enthusiastic about going out and throwing, I'm going to do it. Because there's only so many flat forehands and backhands you can practice. And I think being loose and experimenting with your throws is how you get better. Like, being variable with your throws. Like, you see basketball, the best shooters have had the most reps shooting in different positions from different places on the field with different, like, defensive pressure every time. And if we can try replicate that in frisbee with just, like, being a bit looser with our training regimens, that can help. Obviously, there's a time and place for just ripping the same thing over and over, but I think people forget about the other side of it. So the offhand scuba, worked on it for ages. Went to a social beach tournament, was just like, haha, this is memes. We're up by 8 points. The team's not going to be upset if I start messing around a little bit. It's not like, it is messing around, but I'm still, like, trying to score the point. It's not, I don't care if this turns over. I still care if it turns over, but you're pushing yourself with the conscious intent of, like, maybe in the future, this will be a high percentage throw, right? So I was messing around a little bit. First one came off. It was janky as but like it came off, and I was like, oh, this is how next time I need to work on that. So I went away, I kept working on it. Some slightly less social events come out, try it again at like a regional tournament where we're beating a team 14-3 or whatever. Yes, it's working out. And then fast forward to nationals this year, I pull it out to the last point of the national final for a goal, and it's on footage somewhere. But at the time, it came to me. I wasn't trying to force it. It was the first option that popped into my head, and I took that option. And I think if, as players, we're ever not just taking the first thing that comes into mind, we either haven't got enough experience, and that's okay. That's where a lot of the skill in ultimate comes from. Or two, if we have the experience and we're taking and making a conscious decision every time, we're not playing as efficiently as we should be or could be, right? So if we have those intuitive decisions, we should be able to just take them and trust that we have built all the neural pathways to make that decision for us once we hit game state, right? The flow state, as people say. So yeah, watching back that clip of me making that option, I can hand on heart say I couldn't have taken that option with any other throw, right? So that was kind of a revelation for me about kind of what I've been talking about here. Is up until then, I just been like, oh, this is fun. I might use it in the future. But now I'm like, actually, there's other throws. Like, yes, that's a throw that people can go, I can see where that would be useful. But people were still saying, oh, just throw a forehand. There might never be a time when you need that kind of thing. And if we push that to even stranger throws, it's less likely they're going to be useful, but there's still a chance, right? So having that option, if required, when it comes up, is super valuable. And then my last point to this is, in New Zealand recently, we've got really, really good at resetting the disc when we reset it the way we want to. But we've struggled when the constraints or the way in which we want to reset the disc slightly differ, whether that be environmental conditions, the type of mark, or just someone really big, someone small player, how we cut for that and how we throw that. A lot of the time, we're making our move well, we're getting open, but the throw can't hit it. And then we're stuck and we're not able to kind of just hold possession of the disc when it's required, right? Like do something messy just to get the job done. We're really good at doing it in a pretty way, but as soon as you have to kind of grit through it and just make it work, I think that's where the skill level drops off quite quickly. And that's obviously where you see all these top players are really skilled, is that they can just make it work in unideal conditions. But that's something that's really focused for us at the moment.
I think you articulated that super, super well. In my mind, what was kind of going through as you explained that was like, I was comparing it to something in exercise, or maybe just an analogy. So maybe help people better put it into, or I guess convert it to their mind. But for me, it seems like it's the idea of like degrees of freedom, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you have more free, like I'm thinking about like the knee being able to bend or the ankle being able to bend, right? Like if you can only bend your knee to 90 degrees, then like that's how you're going to limit yourself for every movement, right? So maybe you figured out how to change directions by just getting it to bend to 90 degrees in this perfect, pretty little way. But what happens when it has to bend 91 degrees? Well, now your knee is going to explode, or you're just not going to do that, and you're not going to change direction in an effective way, right? And so I think to your point, like if you can expand your bag a little bit, give yourself more options. Like you might not have to bend your knee past 90 degrees most times, but like when you have to, you want to make sure that you're able to do that, right? I also compare it to, and like this might be some easy for people to understand too, is like when you're a beginner with like weight training, this is why like when I work with people and like when I'm first talking to them, kind of doing like the input, if they tell me that they've never trained before, like I get super excited because I know that literally probably anything's going to work, right? Versus like if you've been weight training for a really long time, like you tell me I've been doing squats, bench, deadlift for like 10 plus years. It's like, okay, well then you probably have to do a lot of weight or a lot of volume on squats for you to be able then to push it a little bit, right? So if you're advanced, then it takes a lot more stimulus, a lot more overload to actually get an adaptation versus if you're new, right? And it's kind of the same idea. Like for you, like you've been playing, you said like 12, 13 years, like for you going out and just doing it like a couple flicks, couple backhands isn't going to move the needle as much as a brand new player that's going to move the needle for them. So for you, it takes like, because you're advanced, it takes more overload. It takes something novel in a sense to create the same adaptation that like a novice is experiencing, right?
Yeah. And that's not to say like I don't go out and throw these standard throws. Oftentimes that's 95% of a training session. And I think on the flip side, that's not to say that new players should go and throw these weird or funky throws as a focus. But if people are dissuading people from experimenting with the disc, people are going to learn slower. I think is all I'm trying to get at. And yes, like you should learn your forehand, your backhands. Then you've got your priority list of the next ones to learn. Your like your hammers, your scubers, maybe your offhand, backhand. Like you've got like the generally accepted usefulness of throws tier list that if you were to choose one to focus on, those are probably the ones you go to first. But you shouldn't like limit yourself in an experimentation degree. Like the most enjoyable training sessions, like throwing sessions I've had are when people kind of just devolves into like chaos. People just start tossing random stuff, but people are gaining an understanding of how the disc flies. And there's always something that people are learning when people are like just playing, that I think is really valuable. Um, and yes, like a team training session is probably not the time for that. You want that to be a little bit more like focused and aligned and things like that. But finding the time to just mess around is super valuable.
So if let's say I'm a coach or I'm a captain, right, that runs a team, listening to this, and I want to start to introduce that idea of experimentation. You talked about using like different games or constraints. Do you have a go-to that's really worked well for you?
Yeah, I have one that I really like going to because it forces people to do new things early in the season. And that's just playing mini, whether that's 4s or 5s or lower, um, with like a 3-second stall count, or a 2-second stall count. And some coaches may go, oh, we'll start with a 5, we'll start with a 7-second, then we'll bring it down. I like to go the other way. Just shock people's system, go 2-second stall count, 3-second stall count. And for the first 3 or 4 reps of that, you might have 2 or 3 passes per position before there's a turnover. But people very, very quickly figure out how to maintain position of the disc with this constraint. And a lot of the time that figuring it out is going, oh, I don't have time to catch, set, wait for a good option, throw the flat throw. And the completion rate goes up as soon as that realization happens. People's athleticism hasn't improved. People's skill hasn't improved. It's just the realization that we have to be a little bit more freer with our throws, and our decision making. And the completion rate doesn't go up as high as it would if you had 10 seconds and all the time, and which is effectively as much time as you want. Like it doesn't get to the same level, but it gets pretty damn close for a 3-second stall, right? And people with this understanding, and then as soon as you release those constraints, those throws that they were originally looking to hit are now a lot more available because the defense now knows that everything else is available. So yeah, a 3-second stall is a really simple one, but it's one of my favorites. Something else that I've played around with, you do have to have the right groups for some of these, is like tag stall. So there's no stall count, but if you get tagged by 2 people at the same time, that's the stall out. So like if 2 defenders are charging you down, there's always going to be someone free. It's just how to get the disc to them or things like that. Or you can do like constraint driven ones, mini, where you're going like 2 points for a front cone goal or something like that. And that's one that my team used a lot come the latter part of the season last year, because we got to the point where we were playing really, really good defense, and then the offense would just score front side open side front cone, right? I'd be like, okay, people know what to do. We just need to figure out a way. Like we athletically know what to do. We have the skill to stop this. It's just in a game scenario, sometimes that's something that gets forgotten, but we want that to be a priority. So just rewiring people's brains and playing this game a lot where that's the valuable place to score. You're not telling the defense to protect it more. You're implicitly like telling them to do that by placing value for the offense on that part of the field. So like that kind of training, I think, is super, super valuable. And yeah.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Because I think you said this earlier, but you could just like beat somebody's head in by just saying, don't let them score front cone, but by actually putting like a subconscious, I guess, like
Yeah.
necessity on it, kind of it can work a little better.
Yeah. I think how do I explain this? I think the memory that stands out for the most from this perspective is I was teaching people about like break side movement, or at least that was the goal of the training, right? And I think the drill I set up was something like, if we get the disc to the sideline and then score within a pass, that's worth way more, or something like that. I can't remember the exact thing. And then halfway through the training, like, or maybe it was earlier than that, people started realizing that holding the disc central on the field, hitting a swing and shooting before the defense got there, or being able to continue up the break side before the people got there, was the easiest way to score this. I was just like, yeah, correct. That's exactly what I've been trying to explain this whole time. But just telling people, work it to the break side and then hit the continue doesn't get through to the same people that a games-driven approach does. And a lot of the time you need to do both, right? Because different people will absorb it in different ways. But I think when you're in a team environment, rather than just you're running a training session, like if you've got time to work with a team, letting them come to these realizations themselves is super, super valuable. And I think that's why you see so much success in these teams who have a core that have stuck together for a long time, is that they have the time to, like, even if they might not be consciously experimenting and doing this, they've had the time that they've made all these mistakes and they've kind of had the time to make the mistakes, learn and experiment as a unit. If you have like a new group of people, or you want to fast track your like rookies on the team, having like a block of your season kind of dedicated to this, I think is super, super valuable. Even if there's only like 2 or 3 weeks, and then making like flipping the lever and being like, okay, that's that phase done. We're no longer okay with you who have been playing for 1 year taking a super aggressive shot. Like, that's completely okay. There's a time and place for that. But if you can understand your teammates' initial philosophy better, even if they never, their initial intuition better, even if they never take that shot, you're going to be better at cutting for them, right? Because you understand where their mind first goes to. Kind of all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like we're gonna have to do a part 2 because I know we're coming up on time. But I like this conversation. I have a lot more kind of questions, and I'm sure people are really interested in this. I feel like this is where the sport's going. I feel like this is where the sports field in general is going, like not just the ultimate, but I hear across a lot. So yeah, I got 2 last questions for you, and then we'll wrap it up. I know time's running out. We got this one on Instagram, but in mixed, a lot of times FMPs are often underutilized. How do you plan to address something like this with your own mixed team?
Yeah, this is something I think about a lot. I think the most successful mixed team I've ever been on was a team that we won nationals with a few years ago, where on paper we possibly weren't the best team. It would have been close, but we were the best team come the event because we had the 2 best FMPs on the field at the time, and we were able to utilize them very effectively. So obviously, when you've got clear mismatches, it's a lot easier to do. And I think a lot of the issues that people fall into is looking at their roster and being like, given everyone's matching up against everyone, we are the mismatches. But that's not once you reach the top level in any game, it's not the best player on your team versus the best player on the other team, whether that be male or female. It's where in this 1 to 7 do you have the biggest discrepancy? And the best teams, a lot of the time, that's at number 6 or 7 on the 1 to 7 scale, right? Your 6 or 7 is better than the other team 6 or 7. So that's where you gain the advantage in a point. When you have 3 or 4 of each gender on the field, now it's 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 of each gender. So that discrepancy is going to be smaller because like there's less direct comparisons to make, right? So playing through that mismatch is harder to locate if you do locate where you can gain those advantages. I think that's the best thing to do once you get to a game situation. That doesn't account for, I think, the bigger issue in mixed is that a lot of the time, especially in New Zealand, when we do play both seasons, is that women have more experience playing with women and men have more experience playing with men. And kind of breaking those barriers and getting people more accustomed to kind of just throwing to anyone, cutting for anyone is super valuable. And you see the best mixed players are often the best throwers because they have the widest margin of error in terms of how far they can throw, their touch on the disc. Like, can they throw to this guy? Like, can someone from the women's division come into mixed and huck to a guy? And vice versa, can someone from the opens division come into mixed and like adjust their hucks to a female, right? And just that variability is something that isn't valued often, but is very important in mixed. And then my last thing to say to this question is probably the hardest one to fix because it requires more of a systemic, like ultimate community change. And that's that a lot of the time there's a higher density of male players and male coaches than there is female coaches and female players, which means once you trickle down to the choice when you're making selections for a team, a lot of the time you're going to have more depth on your male side just inherently out of like how many numbers you have trying for you, right? Once you make the team, yes, you're going to have even males and even FMPs like on your roster, but in terms of the depth of those when you are making some selections, often you're going to have more MMPs, right? So then your depth on your team is skewed, and inherently, if you have more depth, to go back to my original thing, if you have more depth, you're likely going to have your mismatches on that side of the table. But this is where it's hard because you don't want that to be the case. You don't want your team to be the team where you're skewed in one direction because that gives you less options for strategic flexibility and all that kind of stuff. So working proactively early in whatever season you're doing, and then across multiple years, if you have that option, is to really encourage and provide the right environment for people to make those mistakes. And although you might have more depth on the MMP side, providing the space for those newer, less experienced players who frequently are FMPs, and especially in the New Zealand community, I'm not sure if this is the case internationally, but often have less experience when they're coming in fresh to the team. Providing space for those people to experiment because they're not going to get up to the same level if they're told to just reset the disc every time, right? And if they are told to reset the disc every time, once they do get good, 5 years down the track, they're not the players who have been your playmakers because they haven't had that time to build that intuition, right? So we have to really allow people from both FMPs and MMPs, but I think in the present time, encouraging the FMPs is going to provide a greater value to your team because that's where you're going to get the greatest gains on average. So yeah, that's kind of my answer. In isolation, when you're in a game, you do kind of make the choice about where do we have the biggest depth right now, and if you have two of the best females on the field, like that's where you're going to play through. But oftentimes, at least the decision makers feel as though they can trust their depth on the MMP side more, which is a problem in itself. But that's where the decision is going to be made. So the problem lies earlier on in the timeline in getting to the point where the obvious decision doesn't exist, and it's a strategic choice about where you're going on the day. And I think that's where this season with my mixed team is really going to be a focus on. In the past, we've definitely had less depth on the FMP side, but if we can focus on our ability to use what depth and experience we do have, especially this year, forecasting selections, hopefully we kind of tilt the scales back in our favor relative to other clubs, and we can have a lot of impact from the FNP side of the disc this year. And that's definitely a focus. So yeah, very excited.
Yeah.
That's the first trial coming up this weekend. So yeah, a lot of thinking.
Yeah, once again, I feel like you articulated that super, super well. And that question was from Helena Terry _ on Instagram. So we appreciate the question. Last one.
Here's my flat net. Let's curious. That's so funny. I was wondering who said that.
Well, there we go. Last one. I end every podcast with this one, but we answered a lot of questions, right? So we provided a lot of answers. But I always like to know, what are the greatest minds questioning that they don't have the answers to, right? So like, I want to know what keeps LeBron James up at night thinking about basketball, right? So for you, what's the big question about Ultimate that you don't have the answer to yet?
I think there's two things that pop into mind. I'll say both. The first one is, what is like the next rule change going to be that's going to change how we play? So that's the first one, because I just think that's really interesting. But then the more tangible one is, given that we have 7 players who all have the same throwing ability, what is the strategic impact of that on the field? Because every offensive structure that you see nowadays, and even defensively, like how that's structured, how you make those decisions, is around some players being better at throwing than others. And assuming the base level is high enough that you can't really make decisions around that, how's that going to impact our strategy? I think it's really interesting. We're always going to get outliers where we have like one crazy good player. And you see it in other sports where you have like the superstars, like you have the, I don't know, you have the Steph Currys, you have the Messi, you have the players who you have to adjust for no matter how good your baseline is. But assuming you don't have that outlier and the base level is so high that it's hard to tell the throwing skill apart, how's that going to impact our strategy and our tactical decisions? Because I think clearly we'll move away from the 2-3 people behind the disc players downfield kind of thing, but I don't know exactly how, and that's exciting to me.
Yeah, that would be interesting to think about. But yeah, I appreciate your time so much. Is there anything you want to plug, and what are some ways that people can find you, contact you, learn more about you?
Yeah, so I'll plug my blog because it's kind of the only thing I have. I started it to keep myself accountable and force myself to do reflection after tournaments and stuff, because I've heard that that's valuable. Don't really enjoy writing about my own tournament experiences, but I forced myself to do it for a year. So there's a lot of that on there, some good thoughts. But more recently, I've been writing about my coaching philosophy and different drills and things like that. So go check that out. It's Bricklock's blog at Substack. Whatever, I can't remember. And then if you want to contact me, Instagram is probably the best place. And that's nicholasw.8 on Instagram.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll leave all that down below too.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Justin. It's been cool.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for being here.
You've been listening to the Tobu Fitness Podcast. Our passion is to be your guide in elevating your game and mastering the art of ultimate frisbee through the lens of strength and conditioning. No hype, just substance. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Instagram and YouTube at Tobu Fitness. And to get info on one-on-one coaching and training programs, hit the website at tobufitness.com. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time on the Tobu Fitness Podcast.